كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So welcome to lesson, alhamdulillah, we've reached lesson 10. There's a lot to get through, as you've noticed. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this easy and beneficial for us. So we are discussing retraction from the testimony by the witnesses. So we already started that discussion. So in this lesson we'll be discussing inshallah the rest of this. So we discussed the case of retraction where it already caused the financial penalty. So then while the judgment will not be changed, however, the witnesses who retracted, they would be liable for paying for the damage that was already caused. So now he says, Imam Quduri says next, وَإِذَا شَهِدَ شَاهِدَانِ بِمَالٍ. Right, the two witnesses, they gave testimony with regards to some wealth. The judge, فَحَكَمَ الْحَاكِمُ بِهِ, judge made a judgment. ثُمَّ رَجَعَ, now they retract afterwards, right, in front of the hakim, in front of the judge, they retract. ضَمِنَ الْمَالِ الْمَشْهُودَ بِهِ, so they would be now responsible for the repayment of that wealth that they had testified in favor of. لِلْمَشْهُودِ عَلَيْهِ, you know, in favor of the person, essentially, for who they had testified against, essentially. So they would have to pay for that, right? Because they're the one who caused him to essentially lose whatever he had, and it was false. I mean, it might have been right, but there's no process. According to the witnesses, they said that he owed the money, or whatever it is, that it was actually belongs to somebody else, that it was not his and it was the other person's land, whatever it was, they would be the people liable for that. Now what happens if the two witnesses gave their testimony in court and then one of them retracted, not both of them? In a case like this, where there's been a financial setback, then they would be responsible for half the damage. Now, similarly, he says, وَإِنْ شَهِدَ بِالْمَالِ ثَلَاثَةً. If a similar kind of case, but there were three witnesses to it, and then one of them comes back. Now remember, minimum is two, but if there is three, and one of them then retracts, as I said, the judgment is still going to hold, but if one of them retracts, he doesn't have to pay any liability. Why? Because by two, that was sufficient to... There's still two left, and two was the minimum in cases of financial issues. Two witnesses are sufficient. So that is sufficient for the liability of the full amount of wealth. That's why one person pulls out, it doesn't make any difference. However, فَإِنْ رَجَعَ آخَرُ, this is where it gets a bit interesting, that one person came out of the three, retracted, right? Makes no difference, nothing changes. However, if now the second witness also retracts, remember there were three, so one retracted, now the second retracts as well. Now both number one and two would become responsible jointly for half the damage, half the financial setback. Interesting, right? Because you see, two right from the outset would have been sufficient anyway. So when the third person pulled out, it made no difference. But when two people pull out, there's only one left. So it means that now there weren't enough witnesses to have started. But as I said, it did not change the judgment. However, these two witnesses who pulled out are responsible for half the wealth. وَإِنْ شَهِدَ رَجُلٌ وَامْرَأَتَانِ. Now if it's the case where it was one man and two women who gave witness, and then one of the women, now this is all maths essentially, right? But there's different ways of looking at it. One of the women retracts. So that means what? Should be 25%? What? ضَمِنَتْ رُبْعُ الْحَقِّ. Yes, is actually, she would be responsible for 25%, right? Because the two women make up 50%, right? وَإِنْ رَجَعَتَا. If both the women come out of it, right, and retract, they would obviously ضَمِنَتَا نِصْفَ الْحَقِّ, they would be jointly responsible for half, which will go back to being quarter anyway. وَإِنْ شَهِدَ رَجُلٌ. Now you could have cases where there's multiple witnesses, right? As you've understood from certain cases we've dealt with in the past. This one is وَإِن شَهِدَ رَجُلٌ وَعَشْرُ نِسْوَةٍ. A case where one man and then 10 women. So there were 11 witnesses in this case, one man and 10 women. And then 8 of the women pulled out and retracted. They don't have to pay anything. Why? Because there's still one man and 2 women left. So it still stands. There's no, the full the full judgment still stands, and it will continue to stand anyway, right? But it's the minimum quantum is still there. That's why, right? Now, if one more woman retracts, so there's 9 women retract, that means who's left is just one man and one woman. That's only 3/4 of the quantum needed. كان على النسوة الراجعات ربع الحق. So 9 women have retracted, 1 is still in along with the man. That means 3/4 are still in and 1/4 are out, equivalent to 1/4, right? So it's like the first man and the first woman make up the main quantum, and then everybody else makes up that last. So those 9 women will be responsible for 1/4 between them, right? فَإِنْ رَجَعَ الرَّجُلُ وَالنِّسَاءُ جَمِيعًا. Now, if all of them retract, all 10 women and the man, I mean, this sounds like a hypothesis, right? A hypothetical scenario. But if the man and all the women, they all retract now, the man has to pay. What does the man have to pay now? Okay. Now, the equation is slightly different in this case now. Since everybody's retracted, it means that the full amount, the 100%, has to be now divided among all of them. So the man has to pay 1/4. No, sorry, not 1/4. He has to pay 1/6. Okay, you might not be able to work this out straight away, but he has to pay sudus al-haq. He's liable for 1/6 of everything. Remember, there was only one man to start with. When everybody retracts, 10 women plus one man retract, he has to pay 1/6. And all the women, the 10 women, they have to pay 5/6, right? This is according to Abu Hanifa. So he pays 1/6, the other 5/6. So you'll have to split up into 6. One the man pays, the other they have to pay. Why? لأن كل امرأتين قامتا مقام رجل واحد. Why? Because the equation is that one man is equivalent to 2 women. There's 5 sets of women, because there's 10. So there's 5 sets of women. So 5 sets of women and 1 man. That means that there's 6 portions, 6 sections, segments. That means the man is responsible for 1 segment, and every 2 women, right, a pair of women are responsible for another 6. So that means the women are responsible for 5/6 altogether, right? And the man is responsible for 1/6. Imam Yusuf and Imam Muhammad Sahibain, they look at it differently. They say ala rajuli an-nisf. No, the man has to pay half, because without there being 1 man, even if there are 20 women, it wouldn't have worked. So the man takes on 50%, right? So he has to pay a half, and the women, all 10 women together jointly, have to do the other half, the other 50%. So that's Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion is the stronger opinion here, but at least you understand the equation is quite simple once you understand that. Right, now let's just say that there are 2 witnesses, 2 male witnesses, who testify regarding upon a woman that yes, she's married, right? That she got married on a dowry that ala mahrin bimiqdari mahri mithliha, similar to her average women of her family's dowry, which is, let's just say, is £1,000, right? Or it was less than that, or it was more than that. So let's just say her average of her family was 1,000. So they said it was less or more, whatever it is, any number. Then after that they retract, which basically means that she's due that amount from her husband. So that's what they've witnessed, that it was only, maybe she was asking for more, maybe she was asking for 2,000. They said no, it was 1,000 or 1,200 or 1,100 or 900. In that case, فَلَا ضَمَانَ عَلَيْهِمَا. There's no liability. Now it could have been that the claimant, right, so it was that, you know, the case would have been maybe that the woman is claiming that no, it was 2,000. and the man was claiming it was 1,000. And they said, yes, it's 1,000. To support the man. They were his witnesses, and then they retracted. That means that the woman has lost out 1,000, right? Are they responsible for then in that case they don't have any liability. Why? Because there's a certain, what the dowry represents is the permissibility of man to have intimacy with that woman. It's called milkul buda in Arabic, that he's owning the right to have sexual intercourse. Now that's not something that can be quantified and say it's worth 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 or whatever. So if it's something that can't be quantified like that, it's left alone, right? It's left alone. So there can't be any financial penalty in this regard. The only time that this becomes quantifiable in a sense is at the time of nikah itself, that okay, no, you better pay this mahar. Okay, only at the outset. But once it's done, then it's all the same, right? Whether then he enjoys her 50 times or 1,000 times, or he pays this much or that much. At the outset, whatever becomes fixed, that is the only time that is allowed. I mean, this is a technicality. Similarly is the case that they don't have to pay anything if they retracted afterwards, where if they bore witness against the man in this case, that he did agree to marry the woman at her average mahar, at her average dowry. He's claiming less, but the woman is essentially bringing these two witnesses, say no, it was 1,000, whereas he was claiming 500, so he's going to have to pay her, right? So in this case as well, if they retracted afterwards, the man has had to pay 500 extra. But again, there's no quantifiable asset here, right? It's just not quantifiable asset in that case. The ability, the payment you give to enjoy intimacy with one another. However, if she had asked for more than her mahrul mithl, so her mahrul mithl, which means her average mahr was 1,000, but she was claiming 2,000, and they testified against the man in that regard. Now they retract. That means the man had to pay more than her average amount, 2,000. They will be liable in that case. Why? Because that's over and beyond the average, so they see that's quantifiable. Then there's now the cases that we're dealing with are regarding, for example, we're dealing with cases of sale now at a certain price. So in a sale you have the recommended retail price, or the value. One is the recommended retail price, then there's a price that people would usually pay for it, an average price you could say, and then there's whatever we negotiate between us as to how much we want to sell. That could be high or low depending on factors. So that's called thaman, and the price that people would averagely pay for it is called qima in Arabic. Qima is the average price people would pay for it, and thaman is whatever we decide between us. That could be higher or lower. So what happens is that somebody done a deal on, let's just say, £10, right? So وَإِنْ شَهِدَ بِبَيْءِ شَيْءٍ بِمِثْلِ الْقِيمَةِ أَوْ أَكْثَرَ ثُمَّ رَجَعَ لَمْ يَضْمَنَ. What they're saying here is, let's just say that the average price of it outside in the market is £10, and they testified that yes, he sold it for £10 or £11 or £12, right? Now, since the seller actually got his average price for it, right, and then after that they retract afterwards, they're not going to be liable for anything, because the seller, at least, he's got and the other person, the buyer, has had to pay, at least the market price or a bit extra, right? This is again if they don't have any so this was the proof that he put out there. Obviously in this case they're going to be witnesses for most likely the seller. It could be either way, to be honest. It could be either way, right? وَإِنْ كَانَ مَا شَهِدَ بِهِ بِأَقَلَّ مِنَ الْقِيمَةِ ضَمِنَ النُّقْصَانِ. However, if the claim was actually from the buyer's side in this case, that no, I only purchased it for 9, and these guys were witnesses for the buyers, and then they retract, which means that the seller has lost. So in that case, it says that they would be responsible for that additional up to the average price of it, which is the £1. Another case, so there's a few cases here. If they bear witness, 2 witnesses, that a man has divorced his wife قبل الدخول, before, so a couple got married, they did not meet one another, they had no consummation. So in that kind of a case, if he divorces her, then there's no mahar or anything to pay, right? So what they did was, they testified that he did divorce his wife before consummation, right? That's what maybe the husband is claiming, right? That he divorced his wife before the consummation. She's claiming no, it was after consummation, etc., etc. So they testify that it was before. Now they retract. That means the woman has lost out on half a mahar, right? So they would be responsible for half of the dowry which she has lost out on, right? So the way it works is that if there was a dowry that was stipulated, then the woman would have got half of that dowry, but she lost out. Understand the next mas'ala, we need to understand the ruling first, then it will make sense. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is that وَإِن طَلَّقْتُمُوهُنَّ مِن قَبْلِ أَن تَمَسُّوهُنَّ وَقَدْ فَرَضْتُمْ لَهُنَّ فَرِيضَةً فَنِصْفُ مَا فَرَضْتُمْ إِلَّا يَعْفُونَ وَيَعْفُوَ الَّذِي بِيَدِهِ عُقْدَةُ النِّكَاحِ. If you divorce them, let's just say a couple got married, before any kind of consummation, before intimacy or anything of that nature, he divorced her, and they had stipulated a mahar, so the mahar was supposed to be £1,000, for example. Then what happens is he is liable for only half the mahar, just by merely being married to her. Even though they didn't have no intimacy, no consummation, he still has to pay half the mahar. Had they not stipulated a mahar but got married, but there was no mahar discussed, then he still has to give mut'ah, which is basically one set of clothing. Okay, so there's always a liability there. However, as they will discuss in this mas'ala, that sometimes if the separation had to happen because of a fault or push of the woman, then in that case the half a mahar drops. Okay, in certain cases then he doesn't have to pay anything. So keeping that in mind, let's read the next section. He says, if there was a nikah and then there's a dispute about when the husband divorced his wife, whether it was before consummation or after consummation. So the husband is obviously saying it was before consummation, so that he only has to pay half or none. Okay, actually he's saying that I think in this particular case the scenario is that he's saying that the woman forced him to divorce, so he doesn't have to pay anything. That means the woman's not going to get anything, and he brings these 2 witnesses and they say yes, that was the case, we bear witness to that. Then they retract. So who's lost something? The person who's losing is the wife, right? She's losing the potential for half the mahar. Okay, she's the potential, she's lost half the mahar, right? That half that she was supposed to get. So وَإِن شَهِدَ عَلَى رَجُلٍ أَنَّهُ طَلَّقَ إِمْرَأَتَهُ, if they bear witness upon a man that he divorced his wife before dukhul biha, before any kind of consummation, then they retract. They would be liable for the half mahar that he has paid, right? That he has had to pay. Okay. لأنهما قرر عليه مالا كان على شرف السقوط بمجيء الفرقة من قبلها. So actually what's going on in this case is that it's kind of a hypothetical scenario, right? It's a hypothetical scenario in the sense that there was no discussion about the fault of the woman or not, but they said that yes, he divorced before the dukhul, so she gets half, right? So that means that he has to pay her half. Then after that, they pull out and retract it, but he's already had to pay her half. So they're responsible for the half mahr that he had to pay her. So how would it be a disadvantage? Well, the disadvantage would be that how the man could have gotten away with less is that if there was some way that he could have established that the fault was hers, then he wouldn't have had to pay anything. But they bore witness on behalf of the wife to say that yes, he did that before, and the fault was basically not the woman's. Essentially, that has to be assumed here for this to make sense, right? So that's why they would be liable for that half a mahr, half a dowry that the husband had to pay the wife. The next case is وَإِنْ كَانَ بَعْدَ الدُّخُولِ لَمْ يَضْمَنَ. Of course, if this was a case or a dispute about when the divorce took place, but it was after the dukhul, meaning if it was after consummation, right, they would not be liable for anything, because a full mahr is necessary regardless whether it's her fault or his fault for the divorce taking place. Once a person has consummated the marriage, then the full dowry becomes obligatory, right? There's no half left afterwards. There's no half option left anymore. The full dowry becomes necessary regardless of whether it's his fault or her fault. Yes, if she's the one who's pushing for it, he can do a khula where he negotiates with her to cancel the mahar or to pay him back or whatever. If he gives her a divorce, then that would become a different case, right? So if they do retraction afterwards, it won't make a difference. وَإِنْ شَهِدَ أَنَّهُ عَتَقَ عَبْدَهُ ثُمَّ رَجَعَ ضَمِنَ قِيمَتَهُ. Another very simple mas'ala. He's saying that if they bear witness that he freed his slave, so it's gone to court, the court, essentially what happened is that the slave took the master to court that he freed me, and the master say, I did not free him. They bring these two witnesses. The slave brings the two witnesses, and they say, yeah, we saw him free, we heard him, it was very clear he freed the slaves, right? And then after that, they retract afterwards. They're going to have to pay the value of the slave because the man has lost, the master has lost his slave, so they're going to have to pay his value to him. وإن شهد بقصاص ثم رجع بعد القتل ضمن الدية. This is a case where they testify that person X killed person Y, and then after ثم رجع بعد القتل, Ya Allah, after this guy is killed for that and the penalty is done, then they come back and say, no, sorry, we retract now, we were incorrect. Now again, we don't know what the reality is, it's just that they're retracting. They would be now, the murderer has been killed now. The one who was accused as being a murderer, he's gone now, he's been killed. So now what's going to happen is they're going to have to pay his family the diya, the ransom money for that, right? They're going to have to pay. وَلَا يُقْتَصُ مِنْهُمَا. They can't be killed in retaliation for it though, because they didn't do any killing as such. They're not the ones who killed him, right? And they're not the ones who forced anybody to kill him either. Yes, I know it was because of what they said, right? Similarly, when we spoke about the deputy witnesses who are deputizing on behalf, it's going to be similar cases as well, that if they have caused a financial loss in some cases, they will have to pay as well, right? So the hukum is similar in their case. Right, there's another issue here, which is that, let's just say that there was a case of a deputy, giving witness. The original guys retract, and then they say that we did not make these deputy guys our witness for our testimony. So essentially, they're basically pulling the rug from under their feet. But there's no financial liability for that. On the other hand, if they said, yes, we did make them witness. So in the first case, they're saying that we did not even make them witness. They're rejecting that. They're denying that. In the second case, saying that we made them witness, but we made a mistake. In that case, they would be responsible, right? There's some difference of opinion here. We're not going to go into that right now. On the other hand, if the deputy witnesses, after a judgment was made with their testimony, if they somehow belied the original witnesses or said that we made a mistake or whatever, that's going to be ignored now, right? Because once the process has taken place, it's too much to keep going back, so they're going to ignore that, right? Now we got a case of the zina. I said that requires 8 witnesses. That requires 4 male witnesses. So let's just say that there were 4 male witnesses who witnessed to the fact that this particular individual committed zina, right? Now, if it's a married person who does it, there's stoning. And if it's an unmarried person who's never been married before who commits zina, then there's flogging. So there's a big difference between them. So what you need in this case is that you need somebody to also witness that this guy is married, or has been married in the past. For ihsan, you call that status of ihsan becoming established. Because without that, it'd just be flogging. It won't be the stoning to death. So you had the 4 witnesses say, yes, he committed zina. That's established. But we now need 2 witnesses to say that he has been married before. Now what happens is, the fornication witnesses, they haven't retracted, but the witnesses to say he's been married before so that he has a status of ihsan, they retract, right? That means that he was given the punishment of stoning rather than that. They would not be they would not be liable for any penalty or anything of that nature, right? Why? Because the real reason for him gaining a penalty or being guilty is the fornication itself. That's just an additional, that's not the main objective of it, right? Yes, I know it creates a big difference in the outcome, but he's saying that the main reason is why did he fornicate. So that was the case, right? To finish off this discussion, the way they explain this is that, you know, just as one of the conditions for the witnesses to be intelligent and to be Muslim and so on, if one of those were missed afterwards, that would not that would not create any liability in that sense. So similarly, ihsan is just a side condition. The main issue was the zina, right? Was the fornication. Okay, to finish off now, to finish off this chapter quickly, there's a few masail left and we'll finish them off now, inshallah. وَإِذَا رَجَعَ الْمُزَكُّونَ عَنِ التَّزْكِيَةِ ضَمِنُوا. Now these are the guys who were used to validate a witness to say that, yeah, they have uprightness and they were reliable. They now come back and retract and say, no, you know, we were wrong. We said that he was upright, but he's actually not upright or whatever. They would be responsible according to Imam Abu Hanifa. Sahibain say they will not be responsible, right? So they treat him just like the witnesses of the ihsan in the previous mas'ala, right? And they have their reasons. Then we got another case where somebody, 2 witnesses, witness that bil yamin, that somebody has sworn an oath. And there's 2 other witnesses who say that the so what this is a bit of a longer case. That let's just say that a person is claiming, a wife is claiming that the husband took an oath that if I enter my dad's house, then I am divorced. Or, yeah, Let's just say that. So that means that the guy took an oath that she would be divorced if she entered the house, or if he entered the house. So that is the oath itself. Then, so you've got two witnesses to testify that yes, he definitely took that kind of an oath, because he's now rejecting it. For example, he's denying it. And then you've got a witness. See, that doesn't do anything yet. Now, the second case scenario is, and the wife is now claiming also that he entered the house, or she entered the house, whatever the condition was, right? So that means she's divorced. She wants out. So now she's got two witnesses to that effect as well. So that means it's a done deal. She's divorced, right? Now, all four of them retract and say, no, he did not make that oath. And the others say he did not enter either. So who is liable now for the loss incurred, right? So it will be the ones, the first ones who said that he had made such an oath. They're the ones who are going to be liable for, in this case, there's no financial liability as such. In the case that, if I do X, Y, and Z, then I will give this much in charity, or something like that. So that's the issue. That's how he has explained it. Okay, so alhamdulillah, that brings us to the end of this whole chapter of shahadat, of witnessing. Hopefully we've been able to benefit from that, understand the underlying dynamics of that and the mechanics of that, and that will help us inshallah. As you know, there are some quirky masail within that. As long as we remember those, the rest of it is quite straightforward, quite standard. We can understand it, make a note of it, and that's how we understand it. So if you just make a note of the procedure in all of these things, it will help us a lot. So we've covered all of those things, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us with that. Jazakumullah khairun. We'll see you in the next lesson inshallah.